The impact still vibrated through Cale's bones, a dull ache radiating from his hip. One moment he was huddled in the dim, cramped holding cell. The next, a massive, clawed hand had seized him, dragging him through alien corridors that pulsed with strange internal lights and smelled of ozone and something sharp, like burnt metal mixed with exotic solvents. Then he was simply thrown. He landed hard on a grated deck, the thin, rough fabric of his prisoner uniform scraping against alien metal with a harsh asterisk ZZZT asterisk sound. A raw gasp escaped him, quickly swallowed by the sheer, overwhelming scale of the space around him. This wasn't just a room, it was the very guts of a leviathan. Twisted conduits, thick as human torsos, snaked up into a cavernous ceiling that disappeared into shadow and flickering, unhealthy light. Sparks, fat and bright as molten stars, spat from a massive, ruptured power manifold directly ahead, casting momentary, terrifying glimpses of the chaos. The air hummed with a dying power, a discordant, high-pitched whine that grated on his teeth, a sound he recognized, instinctively, as a major system in its death throes. Probably the main plasma containment field, or something equally catastrophic. Above him, a hulking Cathar guard stood, its multi-jointed legs clicking on the deck plating like a dozen segmented claws. Its head, a jagged armored skull, swiveled slightly, focusing its compound eyes on him. The alien said nothing, but the message was clear, etched in the way its heavy energy rifle was pointed directly at Cale's chest. Move, or die. Another Cathar, smaller but radiating an icy predatory authority, stepped into the light. This one wore elaborate, obsidian sheen armor, its voice a gravelly rumble that vibrated through Cale's chest even before its universal translator crackled to life. "Pathetic insect," the commander rasped, its visual sensors sweeping over him with contempt. "You claim your species understands complex systems. You will fix our core, human. Make it function as it did before your pathetic species interrupted its journey. Your usefulness begins now, or ends just as quickly." There was a cold, calculating malice in its tone, a promise of pain that settled deep in Cale's gut. Cale pushed himself up, every muscle screaming in protest. His gaze, however, was already locked on the devastation, his engineer's mind, disciplined by years of high-pressure repairs on far less forgiving human vessels, dissecting the failure points. A series of twisted conduits, a scorched power coupling that looked like alien slag, fractured plasma containment relays glowing with residual, unstable energy. It was a catastrophic mess, a beautiful, terrifying mess of advanced alien tech, and he, a single captured human, was supposed to fix it. He was a human, a captured human, tossed into the churning, dying heart of an alien warship, expected to perform miracles under the gun. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the metallic scent of ionized air filling his lungs, overriding the fear. His hands, though still trembling slightly from the impact and the fear, instinctively reached out, already cataloging the damage, mentally mapping the alien energy pathways. The Cathar assumed he was just a tool, a programmable drone. They saw his species as primitive, good for little more than cannon fodder or, apparently, glorified mechanics. They underestimated him. They always did. That was the human problem, wasn't it? To be consistently, utterly underestimated. And it was exactly what he was going to leverage, a weapon forged from their own arrogance. He wouldn't just fix it, he'd make it sing. He'd make it dance to a tune only he could hear, a hidden symphony of destruction. But first, he had to survive. He had to make them believe he was only doing exactly what they wanted. He had to give them their shattered offering, meticulously restored and gleaming, while subtly weaving in the seeds of their undoing. Cale's fingers, stained with alien residue and trembling slightly from exhaustion, danced across the ruptured console. The air still carried the metallic tang of ionized particles, but now, beneath it, he could detect the subtle, complex scent of alien lubricants and supercooled alloys. He wasn't just observing the Cathar technology anymore. He was touching it, feeling the intricate coldness of a plasma conduit, the subtle give of a pressure-sealed junction. Each alien interface, designed for multi-jointed digits, was an awkward puzzle for his human hands. But he pushed through the frustration, adapting, always adapting. His mind, however, was in overdrive. The Cathar overseer, the one with the obsidian armor, had watched his every move for what felt like endless cycles, its compound eyes unblinking. It saw a human, a captured engineer, forced into servitude. It saw obedience. What it didn't see was the meticulous, almost obsessive way Kale was mapping the system architecture in his head, not just to repair, but to understand its core logic. Every energy flow, every data stream, every redundant safety protocol. He was dissecting their grand design, searching for the perfect infinitesimal crack. "Faster, human!" The overseer's voice crackled through the translator, sharp as shrapnel. A heavy energy rifle clicked, the sound echoing ominously through the vast damaged engine room. Kale didn't flinch. He just pushed harder, forcing his tired muscles to obey, making his movements appear frantic, compliant. An act. All an act. He was rerouting critical power flows, bypassing scorched regulators, meticulously patching fractured conduits with jury-rigged alien materials he'd scavenged from around the wreckage. But with every connection he restored, every data link he re-established, Kale was also adjusting. Not in any obvious way, not a sabotage that would be immediately detected. No, this was far more subtle. It was about creating a phantom subroutine, a tiny, almost invisible deviation in the ship's primary control algorithm, a ghost in the machine, a whisper that would lie dormant, waiting for a very specific, future command. He carefully aligned a multi-layered optical fiber, designed for rapid data transmission. Its alien properties were fascinating, allowing for bandwidth that dwarfed human equivalents. As his fingers expertly snapped it into place, re-establishing a crucial link to the navigational core, his mind simultaneously implanted a string of conditional logic. If X, then Y. If a specific, highly improbable external trigger signal was detected, then the ship's primary thrusters would momentarily override their designated vector. Just a flicker. Just enough. It was a single line of code, nested deep within a diagnostic loop, designed to execute once and then delete itself. A flaw so small, so deeply buried within the labyrinthine complexity of their operating system, that no Cathar would ever find it, let alone suspect it. Sweat beaded on Kale's brow, not just from the exertion but from the sheer terrifying precision required. One wrong move, one misplaced connection, and his plan was over. His life was over. But the adrenaline sharpened his focus, turning his fear into a cold, hard resolve. They thought they had enslaved a simple mechanic. They thought they had found a human problem solver. And they were right. He 20 solving their problem. Just not in the way they imagined. The Cathar commander observed him, its vocalizer humming. "The creature is industrious," it rumbled, a note of detached amusement in its tone. Perhaps these primates are not entirely useless after all. Kale risked a glance up, meeting the alien's gaze for a fleeting moment. He offered nothing, no defiance, no submission, just the blank stare of a man utterly absorbed in his work. Let them think that. Let them believe they had him broken. Let them believe he was just another cog in their war machine. The sudden lurch had Kale bracing himself, his knuckles white against the cool, smooth durasteel of the viewport frame. No, not a lurch, a shift. The Cathar warship, the harbinger of vengeance as he'd heard them call it, was no longer limping. It was a predator once more. Out beyond the transparent plasteel, star-streaked hyperspace blurred into shimmering ribbons of impossible color, a testament to its fully restored FTL drive. He'd done his job. Too well, perhaps. The low, resonant hum of the ship's restored core thrummed through the deck plating beneath his boots, a deep, steady bass note that replaced the frantic, dying whine he'd grown accustomed to. The air, once thick with the acrid scent of burnt plasma and desperate panic, now smelled clean, sterile, and faintly of ozone, the healthy odor of an alien war machine functioning at peak efficiency. Kale stood in what appeared to be an observation corridor near the bridge, given a brief, almost dismissive freedom of movement, while the Clean assessed their restored power. He was still under guard, of course, 2 hulking figures flanking the corridor entrance, but they watched the swirling chaos of hyperspace with far more interest than they watched him. His gaze swept over the ship's internal displays, which pulsed with vibrant, steady green readouts, power fluctuations, negligible, Engine efficiency, optimal. Navigation lock, stable. He'd made it flawless. He'd rebuilt systems, rerouted conduits, calibrated sensors, and optimized the energy flow with the meticulous precision of a human engineer who couldn't stand to leave a single loose wire. And with every perfect connection, every smoothed-out algorithm, he'd woven in the thread of his undoing. Or, rather, theirs. A gravelly voice, heavy with satisfaction, cut through the hum. It was the obsidian armored commander from the engine room. The primate's labor was adequate, the alien rumbled, its back to Kale as it gestured at a tactical display. Our core functions beyond expectation. The humans may be weak, but their hands are capable. There was a sneer in its tone, a dismissive arrogance that grated on Kale's nerves. He felt a cold knot of dread and defiant satisfaction intertwine in his gut. They saw capability. They didn't see intent. Kale didn't react. Didn't even turn. His eyes were fixed on the swirling void outside, but his mind was on a precise timestamp, a specific set of coordinates, a faint, almost undetectable frequency. He'd programmed his hidden subroutine to activate only when the ship reached a particular deep space waypoint, beyond the range of standard Cathar interference protocols, and only when it transmitted a specific encrypted burst of data, the kind of burst he knew they'd use to confirm their new course to their fleet. A delayed fuse, a silent trigger, waiting for the echo in the void. His heart beat a steady rhythm against his ribs, a drummer counting down to an unknown explosion. He could feel the anticipation coiling tight in his stomach, a mix of terror and exhilarating hope. Would it work? Had he been clever enough, careful enough to embed his flaw so deeply that it would go unnoticed until it was too late? The stakes were astronomical. His life. Maybe the lives of countless other humans if the ship reached its destination unhindered. The Cathar, basking in their regained power, were arrogant in their ignorance. They believed in the perfection of their systems, in the predictability of their enemies. They believed they had solved the human problem. But Kale knew better. He knew that the most dangerous thing about a human, especially a cornered one, was that they were never truly solved. They were simply waiting for the right moment to rewrite the program. The harbinger of vengeance vibrated with a perfect, deadly hum for exactly 1 microcycle too long. Then, without warning, the entire ship shrieked. Not the groan of failing metal, not yet, but a sudden, deafening cascade of alarms that tore through the sterile hum of the observation corridor. Red emergency lights pulsed frantically, painting the polished deck plating in strobing crimson hues. Kale, who had been leaning against the viewport, felt the deck heave violently beneath his feet. This wasn't a gentle course correction. It was a brutal, uncontrolled shudder, threatening to rip the warship apart. His hands shot out, gripping the cool durasteel frame, knuckles white as bone, his breath catching in his throat. Out beyond the plasteel, the hypnotically blurred streaks of hyperspace, moments ago, a serene river of light, twisted into a disorienting, sickening spiral. Then, with an abrupt, bone-jarring snap that reverberated through the vessel, they solidified into sharper, more defined starfields. The jump drive had disengaged, prematurely, violently. The G-forces hit like a physical punch, pressing Kale against the bulkhead for a brutal second before slackening, leaving him gasping for air, the metallic taste of fear sharp on his tongue. What is this? A Cathar guard shrieked, its multi-jointed legs splaying awkwardly as it struggled for purchase. Its heavy energy rifle clattering against the deck plating before it recovered its balance with a heavy thud. The other guard, caught completely off balance, slammed into a console. Sparks showered from the alien interface as its armored head struck it. Pure, raw panic, utterly undisguised, erupted on the bridge, visible through the reinforced transparency of the command center. Crew beings scattered, their guttural cries of confusion mixing with the blaring alarms. The obsidian armored commander, the one who'd called Kale a pathetic insect, was now bellowing orders, its voice a guttural roar of pure terror, completely lost to the universal translator's nuances. Its compound eyes flicked frantically between its struggling crew and the chaotic navigational readouts that now pulsed critical, ominous warnings across every screen. Cale watched it all, a grim, almost detached satisfaction chilling him to the bone. This was it, the ghost in the machine. The whisper he'd so carefully woven into their perfect ship. His hidden subroutine, nestled deep in the ship's primary control algorithm, had just executed its command. The specific, encrypted burst of data he'd predicted, a routine confirmation, of course, to their distant fleet, had been transmitted. And his single line of conditional logic, the "if X, then Y," had kicked in, precisely as intended. It wasn't an explosion, not a catastrophic system failure they could easily detect. It was far worse for them. It was a time deviation, days. A single, momentary, imperceptible override to the main thrusters, an infinitesimal twitch in their vector. That had, just now, triggered the catastrophic, unplanned emergency jump drive disengagement. The harbinger of vengeance wasn't damaged. Oh no, it was simply lost. Adrift in a patch of deep space, Cale knew, from his salvaged and meticulously studied star charts, was perilously close to a human defense perimeter. Not close enough for immediate, targeted detection, but definitely close enough to warrant intense, sustained attention if it stayed put. A bewildered, stranded homing beacon. "Human, what have you done?" The commander's voice, now laced with genuine fear and unbridled fury, boomed from the bridge, amplified and distorted by its translator. The alien's armored head snapped towards Cale, its segmented visage contorted into a mask of pure, uncomprehending rage. Cale pushed himself off the bulkhead, a small, almost imperceptible tremor running through his hands, a sign of immense pressure. He met the Cathar's furious glare with a practiced blankness. The frantic, high-pitched thrum of the emergency power converters clawed at Cale's ears. Every light in the observation corridor was now flashing a chaotic red, reflecting off the polished alien metal with a sickening strobe effect. Alarms continued to shriek, but with a new, sharper urgency, a sound that spoke of immediate, undeniable danger. The Cathar ship, moments ago a majestic war machine, was now a wounded beast, adrift and screaming into the void. Cale braced himself again, this time not against a lurch, but against the rising tide of pure, unadulterated fear emanating from the Cathar crew. The commander, its previous fury replaced by a desperate, guttural snarl, was now directly in front of Cale, its armored visage mere inches from his face. The energy rifle that had been pointed at him moments before was now pressed firmly into his chest, the faint, acrid scent of its power cell reaching his nostrils. "You! Human! What did you do?" the alien hissed, its translator spitting out the words with a raw, almost primitive savagery. Its compound eyes, normally cold and calculating, were now wide with a frantic, animalistic terror. This was not the same arrogant Cathar. This was a creature facing something it couldn't comprehend, something that defied its perfect logic. Cale didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a wild drumbeat of pure adrenaline. He could feel the cold metal of the rifle against his sternum, the immense pressure. But a strange, almost serene calm settled over him, the clarity that comes when everything is on the line. He knew this moment. He had planned for it. He had made this moment. "I told you, Commander," Cale said, his voice quiet, almost eerily calm amidst the cacophony. "I fixed your ship." "Perhaps," he added, a deliberate pause, "your own systems are simply incapable of handling true perfection." He let the insult hang in the air, a tiny, barbed seed of doubt planted directly into the alien's panicked mind. A low growl rumbled in the Cathar's chest, a sound of pure rage and confusion. It pressed the rifle harder, the cold metal digging into his flesh. But Cale saw the flicker in its eyes, the momentary hesitation. It was searching for an explanation, for an enemy it could understand, a fault it could identify. It would find neither. Not yet. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the alarms. A faint, distant "Kames Obakengage." Then another. And another. Regular. Rhythmic. The Cathar commander's head snapped to the tactical display on the bridge. Its body stiffened. Cale knew that sound. It was a proximity alarm. But not just any proximity alarm. It was the distinct, modulated pulse of a human long-range sensor array, sweeping the sector. His heart leapt. "Impossible!" the commander roared, its voice shaking now with genuine fear. "We are beyond detection range. We are invisible." Cale allowed himself a small, private smile. "Are you, Commander?" he murmured, just loud enough for the translator to pick up. He paused, letting the fear build in the alien's mind. "Or perhaps," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "your systems are simply detecting a ghost." A whisper in the void. Something human. He watched the realization dawn in the alien's compound eyes. A sudden, terrifying understanding that this was no random malfunction, no act of nature. This was deliberate. This was engineered. The Cathar was frozen, caught between its rage and the dawning horror. It had assumed humans were simple, predictable. It had forced a human to work its forge, to build its power. But what it got was not just a functioning machine. It was a weapon turned back upon itself, a silent, unseen hand steering it into the jaws of something far more formidable than a broken plasma conduit. Cale had given them a problem they couldn't solve. Not with their guns, not with their perfect logic. The harbinger of vengeance shuddered again, violently. But this time it was the unmistakable thump-thump-thump of incoming rounds. Not the plasma fire of Cathar internecine squabbles, but the rapid, focused, kinetic impacts of human railguns, tearing through alien ablative armor. The alarms, already screaming, ratcheted up another notch, becoming a desperate, piercing wail that vibrated in Cale's teeth. The observation corridor plunged into near darkness as emergency power flickered, casting grotesque, shifting shadows from the Cathar guard still fumbling with its rifle. Panic had fully seized the bridge. The commander, its armored form now a silhouette against the chaos, was no longer yelling orders. It was snarling, thrashing, slamming its multi-jointed fist against an unresponsive tactical display. The Cathar, once so perfectly disciplined, were devolving into a frantic scramble for survival. Their ship, which had been untouchable moments ago, was now a giant, slow-moving target, adrift precisely where Cale had intended it to be, right in the crosshairs of a human deep space patrol. His ghost in the machine had worked. It had guided them, blind and arrogant, into the waiting maw. The floor beneath Cale's feet bucked again, harder this time. A direct hit. Somewhere deep within the ship, metal groaned, a sickening sound of rending. Smoke, thick and acrid, began to seep from vents, carrying the stench of burning circuits and ozone. This was his moment. This was the synthesis. "What is happening?" shrieked one of the guards, its voice a terrified whimper. Its compound eyes darted frantically, not at Kyle, but at the bridge, where the commander was still raging, and at the dimming corridor ahead. Its heavy energy rifle was now held loosely, its focus entirely external. Cale didn't hesitate. He reacted on pure instinct, a surge of adrenaline sharpening his senses to razor edge. He knew this ship. He knew its emergency protocols, its escape routes. He had meticulously studied them during his repairs, not just for escape, but for sabotage. He threw himself forward, not at the guard, but at a heavily armored panel recessed into the wall. It was an access point to the auxiliary power conduits, a system he had stabilized with a carefully calculated, almost imperceptible surge vulnerability. The guard, distracted by the external attacks, saw him only belatedly. "Human!" it roared, finally re-aiming its weapon. But Cale was faster. His human weight, driven by desperate survival, slammed into the panel. A jolt, a surge he had orchestrated, shot through the conduit behind it. The panel buckled inward, sparking violently. With a feral grunt, Cale ripped a handful of exposed, sizzling wires free. He knew exactly which ones. He twisted them together, the raw energy arcing and spitting between his gloved fingers, the smell of burnt plastic filling his nostrils. The lights in the corridor went out completely, plunging them into suffocating darkness, broken only by the strobing red emergency glow from the bridge and the distant, violent impacts. "Blind them!" he heard a human voice bark over a distant, static-laced comms channel. A familiar sound, a wave of relief washing over him, quickly followed by the bone-deep terror of being caught in the crossfire. The Cathar guard screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the feedback from Kale's makeshift short-circuit caused its multispectral vision to overload, bathing its optic nerves in agony. It staggered back, flailing, its weapon discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. Kale didn't wait. He sprinted, ducking low, using the darkness and the chaos he had created to his advantage. He knew exactly where the emergency egress hatch was, a small, heavily shielded escape pod bay he'd meticulously checked during his calibration routine. Another impact rocked the ship, sending Kale sprawling, his face scraping painfully against the grated floor. He tasted blood, metallic and hot. The sudden silence in the escape pod was almost as deafening as the explosions that had just torn apart the Cathar warship. One moment the harbinger of vengeance was a blazing inferno, a silent, beautiful nova blooming against the cold, distant stars. The next, it was gone, reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas and glittering shrapnel. Kale's pod, a small, battered speck of human-engineered resilience, tumbled away from the fading light, its internal systems humming a fragile, almost hopeful song. He lay strapped into the crash couch, every muscle aching, his head throbbing from the impacts. The faint metallic taste of blood still lingered from where his face had scraped the deck. But the pain was a dull companion now, overshadowed by a raw, overwhelming flood of relief. He was alive. He had done it. Through the pod's tiny viewport, he watched the debris field drift past, a glittering monument to his desperate gamble. Then, like sharks scenting blood, the human patrol ships moved in, sleek, angular, their navigation lights a reassuring familiar pattern. They carved through the chaos. 2 frigates, 1 destroyer, a standard deep space intercept group. They were here, because Kwon had led them here. His breath hitched, a ragged sound in the quiet pod. He found himself laughing, a low, shaky chuckle that quickly turned into a silent sob, then back into a grim, exhausted grin. The sheer audacity of it, the impossible gamble. And it had paid off. The Cathar, with all their advanced tech and cold logic, had been outmaneuvered by a human engineer with nothing but a wrench, a desperate plan, and an unyielding refusal to die quietly. Then, a crackle, not the alien growls of the Harbinger, not the frantic shriek of its dying alarms. This was different. A crisp, clean voice cutting through the static on the emergency comms channel. Pure, unadulterated human. "Unknown pod, identify yourself." Repeat, "Unknown pod, identify." Kale fumbled with the comms panel, his fingers stiff and clumsy. He had to hit the right sequence, send out his preset identification beacon, signal his presence. The adrenaline surged again, but this time it was a warm, hopeful rush. This is Kale. Engineer Kale," he rasped, his voice raw, barely a whisper. "Of the Dauntless. Prisoner, now free." He coughed, a dry, painful sound. "Requesting pickup. And maybe a coffee?" A beat of stunned silence from the other end. Then an incredulous laugh, full of genuine relief and surprise. "Kale? Engineer Kale? Holy stars, it's actually you. We've been looking for you for months, you son of a gun. Stand by, pod, we're locking a tractor beam on your position. And yes, Kale, you definitely get a coffee. A whole damn pot, if you want it." The voice, sharp and professional, now held a tremor of something profound. Recognition, relief, and perhaps a touch of awe. Kale slumped back into the crash couch, his eyes closing, tears blurring the edges of his vision. The familiar voice, the simple promise of coffee, it was like a lifeline pulling him back from the abyss. He had been a problem solver for the aliens, a forced cog in their machine. But he had solved his own problem too. He had found a way to turn their underestimation, their arrogance, into his greatest weapon. He had survived. Because that's what humans do, isn't it? We find a way, even when the odds are stacked beyond impossible. We just endure. The artificial gravity of the human destroyer, the Resolute, was a welcome, if slightly disorienting sensation after cycles of alien biomechanics and the gut-wrenching lurches of an exploding warship. Cale felt his weight settle, a familiar anchor, as the hatch of his escape pod hissed open. The air that rushed in wasn't sterile or metallic. It carried the warm, comforting scent of human-grade oxygen, faint disinfectant, and something else. Something almost forgotten, like brewing coffee. A human medic, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with relief, was the first to reach him. Her hands, gentle and efficient, were already checking his vitals as Cale unstrapped himself from the crash couch. The touch, the familiar language of concern, was almost overwhelming. "Easy there, Cale," she murmured, her voice soft. "You're safe now. Looks like you had quite the trip." He just nodded, a raw, choked sound escaping his throat. His legs felt like jelly, but he pushed himself up, leaning heavily on the medic. Beyond her, the corridor of the Resolute was a comforting sight of dull gray plating, functional lighting, and other human faces, wary, relieved, and undeniably curious. He could feel their gazes, a mix of awe and disbelief, lingering on him. He was a ghost returned, a legend whispered in hushed tones, suddenly standing solid before them. Later, in a small, sterile debriefing room, with a mug of actual steaming coffee warming his hands, Cale recounted his ordeal. The obsidian-armored Cathar commander, the damaged core, the meticulous repairs, and the hidden subroutine. He described the faint, almost imperceptible deviation, the silent command that had ripped the Harbinger from hyperspace and delivered it, bewildered and vulnerable, into human hands. A small team of intelligence officers, their faces grim and attentive, listened without interruption. "So, you didn't just fix their ship," Engineer Cale, a stern-faced admiral, finally said, leaning forward. "You weaponized their trust. You made their own perfect system betray them." Cale took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. "They underestimated us, Admiral," he said, his voice stronger now, a quiet steel in its undertone. "They thought humans were simple, predictable, good for manual labor. They never accounted for the fact that a human engineer, given enough time and motivation, will not just piece off a problem, but will find the absolute weakest point in their solution and turn it into our advantage." The Admiral nodded slowly, a thoughtful, almost chilling look in her eyes. "Indeed. This isn't just about destroying a warship, Cale. This is about sowing chaos. Every Cathar engineer, every Cathar commander, every Cathar dignitary will now look at their systems, their perfect, flawless technology, and wonder. Wonder if a human touch, even one of repair, left behind a ghost. A flaw they can't find. A whisper of doubt." Cale leaned back, the last of the physical pain receding, replaced by a surge of grim satisfaction. He looked at the Admiral, the tired but determined faces of the officers around the table. He was exhausted, battered, and still shaking deep down. But he had not just survived. He had given humanity a silent, insidious weapon. The Harbinger of Vengeance was gone, but its true legacy would be the invisible, unquantifiable impact Cale had wrought, the contagion of doubt spreading through the Cathar fleet, making them question every algorithm, every perfect line of code, every system they once blindly trusted. Because that's the human way. You push us to the brink, and we don't just push back. We find a way to make your own strength become your greatest weakness. We solve your problems, yes, but only by creating a far more terrifying one for you. The drone of the Resolute's life support systems was a steady, comforting murmur in Cale's private recovery cabin. No more frantic alien shrieks. No more the acrid tang of burnt plasma. Here the air was clean, faintly antiseptic, and carried the ghost of roasted synth coffee from the galley down the hall. He lay on a genuine human bed, the soft mattress a luxury, after the hard, cold-grated decks of the Cathar warship. Every muscle still ached, and a dull bruise bloomed on his ribs, but the deep-seated tremor that had resided in his core for weeks was finally beginning to recede. He was safe. Truly safe. A soft chime announced a visitor. "Come in," Cale rasped, his throat still a bit dry. The door dilated, revealing Admiral Ava Rostova. She carried no datapad, no stern expression, just a quiet, almost weary look. Yet her eyes held a profound respect. "Engineer Cale," she said, her voice calm, a stark contrast to the chaos he'd just escaped. "How are you feeling?" "Like I wrestled a starship and won, Admiral," Cale replied, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. He pushed himself to a sitting position, wincing slightly. The coffee helped. A lot. Rostova nodded, a small, knowing smile on her own face. She pulled up a medical chair, sitting opposite him. "Good. We're still picking through the data, Cale. Your escape pod's black box recorder is illuminating. We've managed to piece together exactly what you did." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "Brilliant. Terrifying. And frankly deeply unsettling." Cale chuckled, a low, raspy sound. "They thought I was just a mechanic, Admiral. An enslaved tool. They didn't think I'd analyze their entire OS architecture and weave in a custom conditional bypass for a specific data packet signature. They never do," Rostova murmured, a distant look in her eyes. "And that's the problem, isn't it? For them, at least. Because now the Cathar are silent. Too silent. No major fleet movements detected in the past cycle. Our probes are picking up anomalous internal sensor pings across their known territories. Diagnostic scans. Deep system purges. They're tearing their own ships apart looking for what you left behind." Cale closed his eyes, a phantom hum seeming to resonate in his skull. The Cathar. Paranoid. Searching for a flaw they could never truly find. It wasn't just the Harbinger he'd destroyed. He'd seeded a virus of doubt. A deep, pervasive insecurity into the very heart of their technological empire. They were a species built on logical perfection, and he had shown them the terrifying illogicality of human ingenuity. "A ghost in the machine," Cale said softly, opening his eyes. "That's what I left them, not just my code, but the idea that a human, their supposedly primitive, disposable enemy, could do such a thing. That a system could be perfect, yet still be undone by an unexpected alien mind." Rostova met his gaze. "And that, Engineer Cale," she said, her voice a low, gravelly acknowledgement, "is a weapon far more potent than any railgun or plasma cannon. It's the kind of fear that cripples an empire from the inside out. They will never trust their own perfect machines again, because a human touched them. And that, Cale, is why humanity will always stand out. We don't just fight, we adapt, we learn. And when cornered, we invent new ways to make our enemies question everything they thought they knew, until the very foundations of their power begin to crumble." A quiet heartbeat of doubt, echoing through their entire fleet. The scent of real, earth-grown coffee still clung to Cale's small recovery cabin on the Resolute. He was out of the med bay now, officially discharged, though the phantom aches in his bones might never truly leave him. He sat by a viewport, watching the distant, cold stars, a stark contrast to the swirling, frantic chaos of hyperspace he'd seen through Alien Plasteel. The physical fight was over, but the war, he knew, had just taken an entirely new, deeply unsettling turn for the Cathar. Admiral Rostova appeared at his door again, not in full dress uniform, but in a simpler, tactical flight suit. She carried a datapad, but didn't consult it, her gaze fixed on Cale. "Engineer," she began, her voice low, "we've intercepted a new burst from the Cathar. It's intriguing. It wasn't a transmission. It was an internal security alert, broadcast across a wide band, almost like a desperate cry for help disguised as an order." Cale turned, a flicker of grim curiosity in his eyes. "And? They're ordering all vessels that have undergone Chimseni human-centric repair or analysis in the past 3 cycles to undergo immediate, full-spectrum diagnostic purges. They're resequencing core algorithms, installing new, deeply invasive AI watchdogs. They're effectively cannibalizing their own fleet's operational readiness in a frantic search for your ghost." Rostova's lips twitched, a dry, almost cynical smile. They're looking for a flaw that doesn't exist in a physical form, Kale. They're looking for short. The weight of it settled in Kale's stomach, a cold, heavy stone. He hadn't just destroyed a ship. He had infected an entire empire with paranoia. He had weaponized the intangible. The Cathar, a species that prided itself on logic, on predictable patterns, on the unblemished perfection of their technology, were now facing an enemy that defied all those principles. They couldn't quantify it, couldn't target it with a disruptor. It was an unthinkable vector of attack. They'll tear themselves apart looking for something that's not there, Kale murmured, looking back at the stars. Or, rather, for something that did its job, and then self-deleted, leaving only the fear. Exactly, Rostova confirmed, her voice filled with a stark admiration. This isn't just about the Harbinger of Vengeance anymore, Kale. It's about every Cathar captain now second-guessing their own console readouts. It's about every engineer wondering if the next power surge is a malfunction, or another human ghost. It's about them losing faith in the very machines that make them superior. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. It's a strategic paralysis. And it buys us time. Critical time. Kale closed his eyes again, picturing the obsidian-armored Cathar commander's face, contorted in fear and rage as his perfect ship plunged into chaos. He saw the panic in its compound eyes, the moment the alien understood that its logic had failed, that a human had outmaneuvered it not with brute force, but with a whisper in the code. He had taken their flawless systems and, by merely touching them, turned them into a source of unending dread. They assumed we were simple, Kale said, opening his eyes and meeting Rostova's gaze. His voice was quiet, but held the weight of untold experience. Primitive. Predictable. They thought they could force us into a corner, use us like a tool. And they found out that the human mind, when cornered, doesn't just endure. It creates. It innovates. It takes the very principles they hold sacred, their technology, their logic, their perfection, and twists them into a weapon they can't even begin to comprehend. He clenched his fists, the faint scar on his knuckles a testament to his ordeal. "We're the problem solvers, Admiral," he finished, a grim, determined fire in his eyes. "But sometimes, the problem we solve is them." Rostova nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a brutal truth. The quiet hum of the resolute South Main Bridge, usually a tightly coiled spring of tension, felt different now. Lighter. It wasn't a silence born of fear, but of focused, almost exhilarating purpose. Kale, still a bit unsteady on his feet, but determined to be present, stood beside Admiral Rostova at the main tactical display. The vast holographic map of the contested sector, once a stark tableau of red Cathar advances and scattered blue human defenses, now pulsed with a new, vibrant energy. Red markers were retreating. Blue lines were advancing. "Engineer Kale, your contribution continues to reverberate," Admiral Rostova said, her voice a low murmur that somehow carried across the busy bridge. Her gaze, fixed on the shifting star charts, held a quiet intensity. Cathar fleet movements have stalled almost completely. Their internal communications are a mess of conflicting high-priority diagnostic requests. We're detecting full-spectrum system wipes across multiple command vessels. They're effectively blinding themselves, trying to purge your ghost. Kale watched the map, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. He saw the retreat, the disarray. He saw the trying to space opening up. He had gambled everything, and the fallout was precisely what he'd hoped for. Not just a destroyed ship, but a psychological strike that crippled an entire war effort. They were attacking themselves, fighting an enemy that was no longer there, leaving space for humanity to breathe. "Good," Kale breathed, the single word carrying the weight of his ordeal. He still felt the phantom shudders of the Harbinger's death throes, the metallic tang of burnt circuits, but now it was a memory of triumph, not terror. Suddenly, a communications officer, a young woman with a determined set to her jaw, spoke up. "Admiral! Incoming secure channel. It's Earth Command. On an open broadcast channel, sir." There was a slight tremor of awe in her voice. Rostova's head snapped around. "Open broadcast? Patch it through to the bridge speakers, Ensign. Priority 1. The bridge went silent, every crew member turning to the central comms relay. A brief crackle of static, then a voice, deep and resonant, filled the space. It wasn't an official debriefing. It was a message, broadcast not just to the fleet, but to every human colony, every outpost, every struggling world. It was a declaration. To all humanity, the voice began, rich with emotion. We stand today on the precipice of a new dawn. For cycles, we have faced an implacable foe, a force that deemed us primitive, fragile. But one human, Engineer Kale, in the face of impossible odds, captured and coerced, chose not to break. He chose to innovate. He rebuilt their greatest warship, flawlessly, only to weave into its very heart the seeds of its destruction. He turned their strength into their greatest weakness. He gave us back hope. A ripple went through the bridge crew. Some clenched their fists. Others had tears in their eyes. Kale felt a lump rise in his throat, a mix of pride, exhaustion, and a profound sense of connection. He hadn't just fought for himself. He'd fought for them. For all of them. The voice continued, growing stronger, echoing with a collective resolve. The Calibrate now hunt a phantom in their own machines, tearing at their foundations, crippled by a doubt that only humanity could have instilled. They thought us simple. They thought us weak. They never understood the strength of 1 billion human souls, echoing in every act of defiance, every spark of ingenuity. They never understood that when you corner a human, you don't get submission. You get a problem solver, a trickster, a strategist who will dismantle your pride with a whisper and turn your certainty into chaos. Kale looked around the bridge, at the faces of his people. No longer just a strategic victory, this was a spiritual one. His actions, born of desperation, had become a chorus, a rallying cry. The Resolute cut through the void, heading towards a newly secured jump point. Kale stood on the observation deck. The vast expanse of stars a familiar, comforting presence through the reinforced viewport. The aches in his body had mostly faded, replaced by a deep, bone-weary satisfaction. The smell of disinfectant and fresh synth coffee still lingered in the air, but now, beneath it, he could detect the subtle, vibrant pulse of human activity, a hum of purpose that resonated with his own heartbeat. Admiral Rostova joined him, her posture relaxed for the first time in what felt like weeks. She didn't speak immediately, simply stood beside him, both of them watching the stars. The silence stretched, filled only by the gentle thrum of the ship's engines. "They're still panicking, Kale," Rostova finally said, her voice quiet, a stark contrast to the urgency that usually defined her. "The Cathar Command has issued a sector-wide directive. Total System Recalibration and Purge Protocol GAMMA-7. It means every single vessel that entered your repair facilities on the Harbinger, or even passed through the same space, is now considered compromised. They're effectively shutting down major portions of their fleet for deep, intrusive diagnostics." Kale nodded slowly, a grim satisfaction coiling in his gut. "They're trying to find a ghost, Admiral, a flaw in their perfect logic. And they won't find it, because it's not a physical bug, it's a thought, a doubt. A human idea." Rostova turned to him, a profound look in her eyes. "Precisely. We're seeing a total operational slowdown across their front lines. Entire squadrons are idling, unable to jump, unable to engage. They're turning on themselves, chasing shadows in their own algorithms. And in that paralysis, Kale, we've found our window." Out beyond the viewport, a new formation of human ships, sleek and aggressive, broke from hyperspace, their engines flaring with confident power. They were not merely defensive now. They were pushing forward, reclaiming lost ground, exploiting the enemy's self-inflicted chaos. The red markers on the tactical map had not just retreated, they were shattered, scattered, reeling. "This isn't just a tactical victory, Kale," Rostova continued, her voice gaining a quiet power. "This is a shift in the war. A fundamental change in how the Cathar perceive us. We didn't meet their brute force with more brute force. We met their perfect, arrogant logic with messy, desperate human ingenuity. We used their own tools, their own unwavering belief in their superiority, against them." Kale felt a swell of emotion, a mix of exhaustion, pride, and the deep, abiding truth of humanity's stubborn spirit. He remembered the cold metal of the alien rifle against his chest, the smell of ozone and fear, The impossible task. He remembered the meticulous, almost frantic hours spent weaving his silent trap, not knowing if it would work, if he would even survive. He had faced total annihilation, and in that darkest moment, he hadn't broken. He had. Iseminai Jori. "They will never underestimate us again," Kale said, his voice raw, yet resolute. He wasn't just talking about himself, or this conflict. He was talking about humanity, a species that refused to be solved, categorized, or contained. They learned today that the human problem solver doesn't just fix things. He finds the weaknesses in the asterisks unbreakable, the flaws in the asterisks flawless, and then he weaponizes them. Rostova placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. "Indeed, engineer. We didn't just win a battle. We awoke the dawn of a new understanding across the galaxy. Because when you push humanity to the edge, you don't find defeat. You find an untamed fire, a boundless spirit of improvisation, and the terrifying realization that our greatest strength lies not in our technology, but in our defiant, unpredictable, utterly human refusal to ever truly break."